She gave him 7 years of her life, her loyalty, her silence about the blood on his hands. In return, he made her a shadow in the manor that bore her name, while he paraded his beautiful mistress Una through the halls of power. He thought she was timid, forgettable, and utterly trapped. But he was wrong. After 3 years of meticulous preparation, she walked back into his world, a phoenix draped in silk and steel, wielding power he didn't know existed. He and his mistress looked right through her, dismissing the woman they had systematically destroyed. They didn't recognize the empire she'd built from their ashes. Not until it was far, far too late. This is the story of Ji Seo's reckoning. The sound of crystal meeting mahogany echoed through the private room at Biko, the restaurant where Seoul's most dangerous men conducted business over 7-course meals. It was a sound Ji Seo had learned to measure time by. Each clink of Minute Jun's whiskey glass meant another hour closer to humiliation, another evening where her husband, the heir to the Kwan Syndicate, a name that made prosecutors pale and politicians kneel, treated her like an unfortunate inheritance he couldn't liquidate. Ji Seo sat across from him in the booth, upholstered in Italian leather that cost more than her parents' yearly income. She was reading legal documents, or pretending to. The contracts blurred before her eyes, meaningless columns of terms and clauses. Her focus was entirely on him, on the cruel set of his jaw as he scrolled through encrypted messages, a faint, predatory smile playing at his lips. She knew who he was texting. Lee Una. The name was acid in her mouth, even left unspoken. Una was everything Ji Seo wasn't: bold, with a laugh that commanded rooms and a body sculpted by Gangnam's finest surgeons. She was a nightclub owner, a convenient title for someone who laundered money through 4 establishments, while photographed on Minute Jun's arm at galas where politicians bowed and judges looked away. Their affair wasn't hidden. It was flaunted. Minute Jun had brought Una to the annual Kwan family gathering last Chuseok, seating her at the main table while Ji Seo served tea to the elders like a servant. Her own mother-in-law had to pretend not to see Una's proprietary hand resting on Minute Jun's thigh during the ancestor ceremony. "Do you need something?" Minute Jun's voice sliced through the silence, sharp as the blade he kept strapped to his ankle. He hadn't looked up from his phone. Ji Seo's heart performed its familiar, painful contraction. It was the voice of a man interrupted by an insect. She lowered her documents, the papers trembling slightly between her fingers. "I was wondering if you'd reviewed the quarterly reports for the shipping containers. The ones through Busan." The accountant flagged some discrepancies that need. He finally lifted his eyes, and the look in them was one of complete, crushing boredom. It was a look that said, "You and your desperate attempts at relevance. Send it to Secretary Park. She'll handle it." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, his attention already back on the glowing screen. The faint smile returned. A new message from Una, undoubtedly. Ji Seo felt the familiar wave of ice wash through her veins. It wasn't anger anymore. Anger had burned out years ago, leaving behind only the cold, grey understanding that she was a contract executed long ago, binding but meaningless. She had been Park Ji Seo, a graduate of Seoul National University School of Law with top honors, when she met Minute Jun at a family-arranged introduction. He had been magnetic, a whirlwind of power wrapped in custom suits, speaking in measured tones that hid the violence underneath. He'd said he admired her intelligence, her composure under pressure. It was a balm to her ambitious spirit. 7 years of marriage had revealed the truth with surgical precision. He didn't love her intelligence. He loved her silence. He loved that she didn't challenge his authority, that she managed the legitimate side of his empire with quiet efficiency, that she was a presentable, if unremarkable, backdrop to his reign of controlled chaos. She had dimmed year by year until she felt like calligraphy left in the rain, once beautiful, now smudged beyond recognition. Her clothes were tasteful but colorless, chosen to fade into backgrounds. Her hair was always pulled into a tight, severe bun. She hadn't worn lipstick in 2 years. What was the point? The only person whose gaze she craved never looked at her anyway. The final breaking point had come 9 months ago. It was their 7th anniversary. Ji Seo had spent weeks planning. She'd hired a private chef who specialized in the royal court cuisine Minute Jun's grandfather had loved, filled their bedroom with white orchids that had cost a fortune, and wore the red silk hanbok he'd once said made her look like a queen from the Joseon dynasty. He came home at 3 in the morning, reeking of perfume. Una's signature scent, a heavy rose that made Ji Seo's stomach turn. He didn't notice the flowers, the chef's masterpiece cooling on the table, or the silk. He walked straight past her, pulling off his tie. Critical meeting, he'd grunted, not an apology, just a statement of hierarchy. The Zhao family from Shanghai. You understand. Minute Jun, she had whispered, her voice fracturing. It's our anniversary. He had paused, his back to her, shoulders rising and falling in a sigh of pure, undisguised irritation. When he turned, his eyes, those eyes that had once looked at her with something resembling warmth, were cold as a January Han River. Ji Seo, for God's sake, it's just a date. We've been married 7 years. What's the point of this performance? His hand gestured dismissively at the orchids, the hanbok, her. Then came the words that shattered something fundamental inside her chest. Don't be so pathetic. It's beneath the Quan name. Pathetic. Her, who had translated his legitimate business contracts, who had smiled through dinners with men who had blood on their hands, who had swallowed his public affair with a grace that preserved his reputation. Pathetic. That night, something inside her didn't just break. It crystallized into something harder, clearer, more dangerous. Now, watching him text his mistress in a restaurant booth bought with money she'd helped launder through shell corporations, the crystallization completed. She stood up, the movement so sudden it actually startled him. He looked up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. What now? I'm going to visit my mother in Busan, she said, her voice steady as bedrock. The decision, once made, felt less like a leap and more like a step onto solid ground that had been waiting beneath her feet all along. Minute Jun shrugged, his thumb already swiping across the screen. Fine. The guest room has clean sheets. He assumed, as he always did, that her entire existence orbited his convenience. He didn't ask when she'd return. He didn't care. Ji Seo walked into their master bedroom in the Hanamdong penthouse. The closet was the size of a small boutique, fragrant with expensive leather and cedar. On one side hung Minute Jun's bespoke suits from Savile Row, his silk shirts custom-made in Hong Kong. On the other, her wardrobe of beige, cream, and pale grey, the colours of surrender. She packed a small suitcase, not with the muted tones of her current life, but with remnants of who she used to be, worn jeans from university, a cashmere sweater her mother had knitted, her law textbooks. She took her passport, the bank card for an account Minute Jun didn't know existed, money she'd been siphoning from her own salary for 2 years, and the jade pendant her grandmother had given her on her wedding day. As she walked past the living room, Minute Jun was still on the leather sofa, bathed in blue light from his phone. He didn't look up. He didn't say goodbye. She closed the heavy door of the penthouse behind her with a soft click, the sound of a chapter ending, a contract voiding, a vow dissolving. Outside, Seoul's winter air was sharp and clarifying. Ji Seo didn't go to Busan. She walked to the nearest subway station, bought a ticket with cash, and rode to Incheon International Airport. Singapore Airlines, business class to Singapore, she told the agent, her voice clear and unwavering. As the plane lifted off, she looked down at the glittering sprawl of Seoul. Minute Jun wouldn't notice she was gone. Not really. Not until his shirts weren't pressed or his meetings weren't scheduled. And by then, she would be far beyond his reach. She wasn't Mrs. Kwan Minute Jun anymore. She was Park Ji Seo. And for the first time in 7 years, that felt like enough. The ghost was leaving the empire. And she wasn't looking back. The first year was brutal, a baptism by fire that burned away every last remnant of the woman who'd served tea at Kwan family gatherings. Ji Seo didn't vanish into glamour overnight. She fled to Singapore, a city-state where Korean syndicate reach was limited and laws were enforced without negotiation. It was a place Minute Jun would never think to look, too clean, too regulated, too far from his sphere of control. She rented a tiny studio apartment in Chinatown that smelled of incense and centuries-old wood. For the first month, she did little more than sleep and watch the city from her window, the exhaustion of 7 years of psychological warfare weighing on her like waterlogged silk. Her savings, which had felt substantial when converted to Singapore dollars, began to dwindle with terrifying speed. Panic set in, cold, sharp, all-consuming. She was 33 years old with a prestigious law degree she'd never used, a 7-year gap in her resume, and a skill set that included managing a criminal enterprise's legitimate front, translating Korean to English for contracts that would hold up in international court, and maintaining perfect composure while her soul slowly died. One morning, Staring at her reflection in the cramped bathroom mirror, she finally confronted the stranger looking back. Her skin was sallow, her eyes hollow, her hair dull and lifeless. She was the physical manifestation of defeat. That was the day the transformation began. It started not with a makeover, but with a decision carved into her bones. Kwan Minute Jun would not write the final chapter of her story. Her first step was small, almost humiliating in its humility. She found work at a Korean-Singaporean law firm as a paralegal, grunt work for someone with her credentials, but it was income. The salary was barely enough to cover rent and rice, but the work reconnected her with something she'd forgotten. She was brilliant at law. The partners noticed within weeks. She could parse complex contracts in 3 languages, spot loopholes that senior associates missed, and structure deals with an elegance that came from understanding both Korean and international business culture. But more than the work, the physical labor of long hours began to change her. The stress melted away the puffiness in her face, revealing the sharp cheekbones she'd inherited from her mother. She started walking everywhere, exploring Singapore's humid streets until her legs grew strong and her mind grew clear. With her first real paycheck, she didn't buy designer clothes. She bought books, not legal textbooks, but books on forensic accounting, money laundering regulations, and international criminal law. In the evenings after work, she would sit in her tiny apartment and study with the same intensity she'd brought to law school, except now she had a purpose sharper than grades. She was learning how to dismantle an empire. A senior partner at the firm, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Chen, noticed her late-night research. "You're not studying for the bar exam," Margaret observed one evening, finding Ji Seo in the law library at 9 p.m. "No," Ji Seo admitted. "You're studying how to destroy someone." It wasn't a question. Ji Seo met her gaze steadily. "I'm studying how to free myself from someone who thinks I'm already destroyed." Margaret sat down across from her. "I left an abusive marriage 20 years ago. My ex-husband was a judge in Taiwan. Everyone told me I'd never work in law again if I went against him." She smiled, the expression sharp as broken glass. "I became Singapore's top prosecutor for financial crimes. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming so powerful they can't touch you anymore." That conversation changed everything. Margaret didn't just mentor Ji Seo, she weaponized her. Within 6 months, Ji Seo had passed the Singapore bar exam. Within a year, she was handling her own cases for the firm. Within 18 months, she was their lead expert on cross-border organized crime financial structures. Her specialty became Korean-Singaporean business law, with a quiet side focus that Margaret encouraged, tracking money laundering patterns between Seoul and Southeast Asia. She built a reputation for being ruthless in litigation, elegant in negotiation, and utterly uncompromising when it came to financial transparency. As her professional life soared, she began the physical transformation. She cut her hair into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed her face like a blade. She started dressing in tailored suits in deep jewel tones, emerald, sapphire, ruby, colors that commanded attention rather than fading into backgrounds. She learned to wear power like a second skin. She also started therapy with Dr. Sarah Lim, a specialist in recovery from psychological abuse. Unpacking 7 years of systematic dehumanization was excruciating. She cried for the woman who'd believed love meant sacrifice. She raged at the years stolen. She mourned the version of herself that had accepted cruelty as the price of stability. But Dr. Lim helped her understand something crucial. Her ability to endure hadn't been weakness. It had been survival. And survival meant she was still here, still fighting, still capable of reclaiming everything Minute Jun thought he'd taken. By the end of the 3rd year, Park Ji Seo had transformed completely. She was now a named partner at Chen & Associates, one of Singapore's most prestigious firms specializing in international corporate law and financial crime. Her client list included multinational corporations, foreign governments, and, ironically, Interpol's Financial Crimes Division. She owned a sleek apartment overlooking Marina Bay, drove a car that whispered money without screaming it, and had built a network of contacts that spanned from Seoul to London. She was financially independent, emotionally fortified, and devastatingly self-assured. One morning, she was in her corner office reviewing documents when her junior associate, David, handed her a tablet with unusual urgency in his expression. "You need to see this," he said, his eyes wide. "Page 3. Ji Seo took the tablet. It was the Korea Herald Society section, covering the upcoming Seoul International Business Summit, the biggest networking event of the year, where old money met new power and politicians bowed to corporate interests. The chairman of the summit's finance committee was listed as Kwon Minute-jun, and on his arm in the accompanying photo, smiling brilliantly in a white couture gown, was Lee Yoona, now listed as Mrs. Kwon Minute-jun. They had gotten married. A younger Ji Seo would have felt a sharp, visceral pain, a twist of jealousy wrapped in humiliation. But looking at the photo now, she felt nothing but a strange, clinical detachment. They looked like characters in someone else's story, frozen in a narrative that no longer had any hold on her reality. David pointed to the list of major corporate sponsors. Look at the legal advisory firm. Ji Seo's eyes followed his finger, and there in elegant print was her firm's name, Chen & Associates, listed as the primary legal advisor for all international contract negotiations at the summit. They wanted her, or rather her expertise, as their main legal authority. The irony was so perfect, so exquisite, it was almost poetic. David was watching her, waiting for a reaction. He didn't know her history, didn't know that the man in the photo had once told her she was pathetic, that she didn't meet his standards. A slow smile spread across Ji Seo's face. It was real, confident, and edged with something that tasted like justice. David, she said, her voice calm and crystalline, call them. Tell them we accept the engagement. And book me a first-class ticket to Seoul. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. It's time I paid my respects to the Kwon family. The chrysalis hadn't just cracked. It had exploded, revealing something far more dangerous than Minute-jun could have ever imagined. The Grand Hyatt Seoul's ballroom was a cathedral of wealth and power. Swarovski crystals dripped from chandeliers like frozen waterfalls, casting fractured diamonds of light onto a sea of designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air thrummed with a carefully orchestrated symphony of Seoul's elite, champagne bubbles, discreet laughter, and the relentless machinery of networking that fueled Korea's economy from the shadows. This was the Seoul International Business Summit, Kwon Minute-jun's annual demonstration of dominance disguised as philanthropy and progress. At the center of the ballroom, cordoned off by velvet ropes and strategic security, stood the evening centerpiece, a stunning art installation commissioned specifically for the summit. It was titled Broken Chains, New Dawn, 3 massive panels of tempered glass, each standing over 3 meters high, arranged in a gentle curve. Embedded within the crystal-clear glass were fragments of actual chains, oxidized, ancient, beautiful in their decay, suspended as if floating in amber. But woven through the metal were veins of brilliant gold leaf that caught the light and seemed to pulse with life. Hidden lead systems made the gold appear to flow like liquid light through the imprisoned metal, a visual metaphor of liberation. It was breathtaking. A powerful statement on freedom forged from bondage. The artist, the program noted, was a rising star in contemporary Korean art, Park Ji-seo, a name that meant nothing to Kwon Minute-jun. He'd barely glanced at the proposal, delegating the artsy shit to the cultural committee. His focus was on the real prize, the multi-billion-won deals he would broker before dawn, the politicians he'd bought who would announce favorable legislation, the power he would consolidate. He stood near the entrance like a king surveying his domain. At his side, Lee Yoona shimmered in a white Ely Saab gown that clung to her surgically enhanced figure like liquid pearl. Her hair was styled in elaborate waves that must have taken hours, and the diamond necklace at her throat, Minute-jun's latest I own you, was blinding. She was the perfect trophy wife, beautiful and polished and utterly dependent. Darling, you've outdone yourself, she murmured, squeezing his arm with practiced affection. Everyone important is here. Of course they are, Minute-jun said, his eyes scanning the crowd, calculating net worth and leverage. This is the only invitation that matters in Seoul. He was in his element, powerful, feared, and in absolute control. The ghost of his first wife, that timid woman whose name he hadn't spoken in 3 years, was a distant, faded memory. He'd heard through Secretary Park that she'd moved somewhere foreign and insignificant. He'd paid her a pittance in the settlement, less than his car cost, and had his lawyers expedite the divorce. It was a clean amputation of dead weight. Then she walked in. He didn't notice her immediately. His attention was captured by the collective shift in the room, the subtle turning of heads, conversations pausing mid-sentence, the kind of ripple that usually heralded a celebrity or foreign dignitary. His eyes followed the crowd's gaze toward the grand entrance. The woman standing there was not a celebrity. He would have recognized her. This woman was something different entirely. She wore a floor-length gown of deep midnight blue silk, cut with such precision it looked like it had been painted onto her body by a master artist. It didn't rely on embellishment or sparkle. The cut was everything, sophisticated and devastating. Her hair was styled in a sharp, asymmetrical bob that gleamed like black silk under the chandeliers, framing a face that was all elegant angles and quiet, dangerous power. She wore a single piece of jewelry, a stunning jade pendant set in white gold, reminiscent of the broken chains in the art installation, a piece that whispered old money and new power simultaneously. She wasn't conventionally beautiful like Una. She was something far more compelling. She was authority made flesh. "Who is that?" Una whispered, a rare note of uncertainty, no, fear, creeping into her voice. She felt it instinctively, the way prey senses a predator. This woman wasn't playing the same game. She'd already won a different war. Minute-Jun grunted, his eyes narrowing. Probably the lawyer. The one who did the contracts, I assume. He dismissed her with casual arrogance. She was staff, essentially. Hired help. The woman began to move through the room. She didn't work the crowd or seek anyone out. She simply walked, posture perfect, gaze forward, a small, knowing smile playing at her lips. People parted for her naturally, their eyes following her path with something that looked like respect. She was heading directly toward the art installation. Her path would take her right past Minute-Jun and Una. As she drew closer, Minute-Jun got a better look at her face. There was something, a ghost of something familiar in the curve of her jaw, in the specific shade of her eyes. It was like hearing a half-forgotten melody from childhood, a déjà vu that made his chest tighten uncomfortably. He dismissed it. A trick of the light. She was now only a few meters away. The event photographer, sensing a perfect shot, the summit chairman with his beautiful wife and the mysterious legal advisor, raised his camera. Una, ever conscious of public image, activated her practiced smile. Minute-Jun adopted his usual expression of magnanimous authority. The woman, Park Ji-seo, though he still didn't know it, paused as she reached them. Her gaze, cool and utterly impersonal, swept over Una's expensive gown, then to Minute-Jun's perfectly tailored tuxedo. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met Minute-Jun's. In that moment, he felt nothing. No recognition, no memory. He was looking at a complete stranger, a mildly interesting stranger who held no significance to his world. "Excellent installation," Minute-Jun said, his voice booming with false warmth. He gestured vaguely toward the sculpture. "Very symbolic. Well executed." It was the kind of praise one gives to competent staff for adequate work. The woman's smile didn't waver. It was polite, distant, and utterly unreadable. "Thank you, Mr. Kwan," she said. Her voice was low, smooth, with a timbre that was somehow both gentle and unbreakable, like silk over steel. "I'm pleased it meets with your approval." She then turned her gaze to Una. "Mrs. Kwan," she said with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "That's a beautiful necklace. Very expensive." Una preened, touching the diamonds at her throat. "Thank you. Minute-Jun has impeccable taste in all things." The woman's smile widened slightly, a subtle shift at the corner of her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "He certainly does," she agreed softly. "He always knows exactly what he wants." And then she was gone. She simply continued her serene path toward her installation, leaving Minute-Jun and Una standing in her wake like furniture she'd walked past. The moment had passed. The photographer, disappointed, lowered his camera. Minute-Jun turned back to the crowd, already dismissing the brief interaction. But the ghost of that melody lingered, nagging at the edges of his consciousness. Park Ji-seo. The name was common enough. And the voice. He always knows exactly what he wants. There was an echo in it, a phantom resonance he couldn't place. Una was chattering beside him about someone's questionable dress choice, but Minute-Jun wasn't listening. He was watching the lawyer. She was being greeted by the Deputy Minister of Justice, a man who had refused Minute-Jun's donations last month. They were shaking hands, the Deputy Minister's face lit with genuine respect. "Ji-seo," he called her, Loud enough for Minute Jun to hear. The contract work you did on the anti-corruption framework was masterful. The president himself praised your analysis. Park Ji-seo. The name echoed again, this time with more force. Park Ji-seo. The quarterly reports for the shipping containers through Busan. That quiet voice on their leather sofa. The woman in the beige cardigan who tried so desperately to be useful, to be seen, to be valued. His blood turned to ice water. He looked back at the lawyer who was now laughing, genuinely laughing, at something the deputy minister had said. Her whole face transformed by the sound, radiant and alive and utterly unrecognizable from the ghost who'd served tea at family gatherings. He tried to superimpose the image of his timid, colorless first wife onto this woman of power and precision. It was impossible. They were two completely different entities. And yet, he saw it. A tiny scar just above her left eyebrow from when she'd fallen as a child. She told him the story once, years ago. The way she tilted her head when listening intently, processing every word like evidence. The specific shade of dark amber in her eyes, now alight with confidence instead of crushed hope. The whiskey he'd consumed earlier curdled in his stomach. The opulent ballroom suddenly felt suffocating, the air too thin. He turned to Yuna, his face draining of color. "What is it, darling?" she asked, her smile faltering at his expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Minute Jun's gaze was locked on the woman across the room. The lawyer, the stranger, the woman he had praised like a servant, the woman who was impossibly, undeniably his first wife. "I think I have," he whispered, the full weight of his catastrophic mistake beginning to dawn. "I think I just did." The encounter had happened. The dismissal was complete. And the woman he had failed to recognize was now the most powerful person in the room, not through money or violence, but through something far more dangerous, legitimate authority. It was too late. Far, far too late. The recognition didn't strike Minute Jun like lightning. It was more like drowning, slow, suffocating, inevitable. One moment he was Quan Minute Jun, master of Seoul's underground and increasingly its surface world. The next, he was a man staring into an abyss of his own creation. "That's not possible," he breathed, more to himself than to Yuna. "What's not possible?" Yuna demanded, her voice sharp with irritation. His sudden pallor was disrupting the optics. "Minute Jun, what's wrong with you?" He couldn't answer. His mind was a frantic scramble of mismatched images. The quiet, submissive woman leaving their penthouse with a small suitcase, and the radiant, self-possessed lawyer holding court like royalty. The two realities refused to reconcile. How could the drab, colorless moth he discarded have possibly transformed into this dragon? He watched as the Minister of Trade approached Ji-seo, bowing with the kind of respect usually reserved for presidents. A rival syndicate boss, Choi Tae-young, a man who'd once threatened Minute Jun's territory, was laughing at something she said, his body language deferential, almost protective. She wasn't on the periphery of this world anymore. She was its gravitational center. "I need air," Minute Jun muttered, pushing past a bewildered Yuna and stalking toward the terrace. He ordered a whiskey from the outdoor bar and downed it in one burning gulp. The alcohol did nothing to steady him. It only sharpened the edges of his dawning panic. He had dismissed her. He had looked the woman who'd shared his bed for 7 years in the eye and patronized her. Excellent installation. Well executed. The memory of his own condescending words made him physically ill. He hadn't just failed to recognize her. He had insulted her on the grandest possible stage, in front of everyone who mattered: ministers, prosecutors, rival organizations, international delegates. Everyone. Meanwhile, Yuna's finely tuned social radar was screaming warnings. She had seen the look on Minute Jun's face. That wasn't business stress or market anxiety. This was personal, visceral. Her eyes darted back to the lawyer, Park Ji-seo. Park. The name triggered something. A fragment of conversation from years ago, Minute Jun complaining about his divorce settlement, mentioning his first wife's family name. Park something. A quiet woman. A lawyer who'd never practiced. Yuna's designer blood ran cold. She intercepted one of the junior committee members, a young woman named Sujin, who worked for the Cultural Affairs Division. "That lawyer," Yuna said, feigning casual interest. "Park Ji-seo. What's her background?" Sujin's eyes lit up with the fervor of someone sharing elite gossip. Oh, she's incredible. Came out of nowhere about 3 years ago in Singapore. She's a named partner at one of Asia's top international law firms. They say she turned down a position with the UN's International Criminal Court to stay in private practice. Sujin leaned in conspiratorially. And between us, the committee got her for half her usual fee. She specifically requested to handle this summit. Something about it being personal. Yuna's practiced smile felt like it might crack and fall off her face in porcelain shards. Not only was this woman wildly successful, but she'd given them a discount. She'd chosen to be here. Yuna glided back to Minutjun's side at the terrace bar, where he was ordering his third whiskey in 10 minutes. So, she said, trying to sound nonchalant and failing entirely, the lawyer is apparently a very big deal. Funny, I don't remember you ever mentioning her. Minutjun's knuckles were white around his glass. Her name didn't register. The committee handled the contracts. The committee? Yuna's voice dripped with disbelief. Minutjun, you approve every line item, every vendor, every napkin color. You knew exactly who you were hiring. She paused, a dreadful suspicion crystallizing into certainty. She remembered fragments now, Minutjun's offhand comments about his first marriage. A quiet woman. A law degree. Park. Oh my God, she whispered, her eyes widening in horror as she looked from Minutjun's ashen face to the woman across the ballroom. That's her. That's your first wife. The words hung between them, ugly and undeniable. It wasn't just that Minutjun had failed to recognize his ex-wife. It was that the woman he'd replaced her with, the woman who'd helped him humiliate her, was so spectacularly outclassed. Yuna, in her glittering, expensive gown, suddenly felt cheap. Her beauty was purchased, maintained, curated, an expensive accessory. Jiseo's power radiated from within, earned through brilliance and forged in fire. The social fallout began almost immediately, spreading through the ballroom like a virus. The story was too delicious to contain. Kwan Minutjun, the man who knew everyone's secrets, had snubbed the star of his own summit. But then someone connected the dots. An older prosecutor with a long memory recalled the first Mrs. Kwan, that brilliant young lawyer who used to attend these events on Minutjun's arm before she disappeared. The whispers mutated, becoming infinitely more vicious. He hadn't just snubbed the legal advisor. He had snubbed his own ex-wife, the woman he'd cast aside like garbage, and he hadn't even recognized what she'd become. The atmosphere shifted. The glances thrown Minutjun's way were no longer purely admiring. They were speculative, laced with schadenfreude. People looked from Minutjun and Yuna with their frozen smiles to Jiseo, who seemed utterly serene, discussing international law with a circle of admirers as if she hadn't just dropped a social nuclear bomb without saying a word. The contrast was devastating. He represented the past, loud, violent, brittle. She was the future, elegant, powerful, untouchable. Minutjun felt the power shift like a change in air pressure before a typhoon. He tried to recover, to work the room, but his swagger was gone. His usual charm fell flat. His handshake felt desperate. He saw people whispering behind raised champagne flutes as he approached, their expressions shifting from respect to something closer to pity. He had become a joke at his own summit. For Yuna, it was a waking nightmare. Her entire identity was built on being Mrs. Kwan Minutjun, the woman who'd won, who'd stolen the powerful man, who'd claimed the throne. But tonight, she was the cosmic loser. She saw the pitying looks from other women, the smug satisfaction in their eyes. They were all thinking the same thing. He left his wife for you, and his wife came back a queen while you're still just a mistress with a marriage certificate. Her diamond necklace suddenly felt like a chain. The white gown felt like a surrender flag. The final, crushing blow came during the summit's keynote address. The MC announced a surprise. Ms. Park Ji-seo, esteemed legal counsel, had prepared brief remarks on international anti-corruption frameworks. Ji-seo took the stage with the same serene confidence she'd carried all evening. Under the spotlights, she was luminous, powerful and composed and utterly in control. Honorable ministers, distinguished guests, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom sound system. I want to talk about the chains we break and the ones we forge. Minutjun's stomach dropped. For years, I worked in systems where power was maintained through fear, where loyalty was extracted rather than earned, where corruption hid behind tradition and violence masqueraded as strength. Her eyes swept the room, landing on Minute Jun for just a fraction of a second, long enough to be deliberate. I learned that real power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from freeing yourself from those who would control you. The room was absolutely silent. The installation you see tonight, Broken Chains, New Dawn, represents my personal journey from bondage to liberation. From being invisible in a world of powerful men to becoming powerful in a world that can no longer ignore women like me. She paused, letting her words sink in. Some of you in this room knew me before. Some of you saw me and looked right through me, as if I were furniture in a space you occupied. Some of you benefited from my silence, my compliance, my willingness to fade into backgrounds. Minute Jun felt every eye in the room turn toward him, even though Jiseo hadn't named him. She didn't need to. I want you to know, I see you now. All of you. And I remember everything. The applause was thunderous, not for her art, but for her message. Women were crying. Junior associates were recording on their phones. The Deputy Minister of Justice was nodding vigorously. As Jiseo stepped down from the stage, Minute Jun understood with perfect, horrible clarity, she hadn't just rejected his world. She had transcended it entirely. And in one elegant, devastating speech, she had exposed his cruelty for exactly what it was, the desperate power play of a small man who had needed to diminish her to feel large. The humiliation was absolute. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't named him, hadn't needed to. She had simply told her truth, and his empire had begun to crumble. The days following the Seoul International Business Summit were a masterclass in consequences. The story didn't just spread through Seoul's elite circles, it detonated across South Korea's media landscape like a precision strike. Invisible Wife returns as legal powerhouse, read the headline in the Korea Herald. From shadow to summit, the rise of Park Ji-seo declared business Korea. Jung-ang Ilbo ran a feature titled The Woman the Kwan Family Forgot that included side-by-side photos. Ji-seo serving tea at a Kwan gathering 7 years ago, barely visible in the background, and Ji-seo on stage at the summit, commanding an audience of Korea's most powerful people. The narrative had been seized from Minute Jun entirely. He was no longer the protagonist of his own story. He was merely a cautionary tale in Ji-seo's epic of transformation. His phone, usually an incessant source of validation and fear-induced respect, grew ominously quiet. The first concrete sign of his crumbling power came 5 days after the summit. Minute Jun had been working for months on a real estate deal in Gangnam, a partnership with the Zhao family from Shanghai to launder money through luxury condo developments. The final meeting should have been a formality, a ceremonial signing over expensive whiskey. Instead, Zhao Wei arrived with his lawyers and a completely different agenda. The partnership is dissolved, Zhao said without preamble, his translator rendering the words in flat, businesslike Korean. Dissolved. Minute Jun's voice came out strangled. Wei, the contracts are solid. The numbers work. This is guaranteed profit. Zhao's expression was carved from ice. The problem isn't the numbers, Minute Jun. It's your reputation. My partners in Shanghai have been reading Korean news. They have questions about your judgment. My judgment. You had one of Asia's top legal minds living in your house for 7 years. She was translating your contracts, managing your legitimate operations, and you treated her like, Zhao glanced at his notes, invisible furniture. That's the quote from her speech. It's viral in China, by the way. 17 million views. Minute Jun felt his world tilting. Business decisions have nothing to do with. Everything is connected, Zhao interrupted. If you couldn't recognize brilliance sleeping in your own bed, how can my partners trust your judgment on a $100 million project? The answer is, they can't. The line disconnected. Soon after, the board members of Minute Jun's legitimate holding companies called emergency meetings to discuss brand integrity concerns. His power, which he'd always believed was forged in his own strength, was revealed to be a house of cards held together by perception. And that perception had just been shattered. For Yuna, the reckoning was more personal and infinitely more cruel. Her world was built on social currency, and her stock had crashed to worthless overnight. She forced herself to attend a charity luncheon for the Seoul Ballet, determined to face down the whispers and reclaim her position. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. She wasn't seated at the head table, the position she'd held for 2 years. Instead, she was relegated to a marginal table near the kitchen, alongside the newest wives who hadn't yet established their positions. The women who had once fawned over her now offered thin, pitying smiles. Han Emma Young, a woman whose social position Una had been systematically undermining for months, glided over with predatory glee in her eyes. Una, darling, Emma Young cooed, each word a perfectly aimed dart. I saw the photos from the summit. Such a dramatic evening. And his first wife, what an incredible success story. It really makes you think, doesn't it? About who really deserved to be Mrs. Kwan all along. Every word was designed to cut, and they did. Una was no longer the winner. She was the placeholder, the inferior replacement, the woman who'd thought she'd claimed a prize but had only ever been a consolation. Their penthouse, that magnificent symbol of power overlooking Seoul, became a gilded cage. The silence that had once been Ji Seo's torment now belonged to them. They circled each other in the vast, sterile rooms, the air thick with blame and recrimination. One evening, Minute Jun slammed a magazine onto the marble kitchen island. It was Asian Business Weekly, featuring a 10-page spread on Ji Seo titled The Phoenix of International Law. It was filled with stunning photos of her Singapore office, her legal victories, and of Ji Seo herself, looking serene and powerful in tailored suits that whispered authority. The article detailed her meteoric rise, her record-breaking settlements, her work with Interpol on cross-border financial crimes. Look at this, he snarled, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. They're calling her a phoenix. What does that make me? Una, who had been staring blankly at a glass of wine, looked up with dead eyes. The ashes she rose from, she said flatly. The insult hung between them like poison gas. Ashes. Minute Jun bellowed. I gave you everything. You were running a third-rate club in Itaewon before you met me. And you were married to a masterpiece you were too blind to see. Una shrieked back, her voice cracking. You didn't just ruin yourself, Minute Jun. You destroyed me. Every woman in Seoul looks at me now and sees your failure. I'm not Mrs. Kwan. I'm the woman who thought she was better than Park Ji Seo. They blamed each other, Una for not being enough, Minute Jun for his staggering arrogance. Their relationship, built on the foundation of another woman's humiliation, crumbled when that woman refused to stay humiliated. 2 weeks after the summit, Minute Jun finally broke. Driven by a toxic combination of wounded pride, desperate rage, and a strange, unfamiliar emotion that might have been regret, he did the one thing his lawyers would have physically restrained him from doing. He went to Ji Seo's hotel. The Four Seasons Seoul's penthouse suite was nothing like Minute Jun's world. It was elegant without being ostentatious, powerful without violence. The receptionist called up to announce him, her expression professionally neutral despite clearly knowing exactly who he was and what he represented. Ms. Park will see you, the receptionist said, surprise flickering in her eyes. Suite 3801. The elevator ride was the longest 40 seconds of Minute Jun's life. When the doors opened directly into the suite's foyer, he found Ji Seo standing by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline. She was dressed casually in tailored slacks and a silk blouse, holding a tablet, clearly in the middle of work. She looked at him the way one might look at an unexpected but not unwelcome interruption, mildly curious, utterly unintimidated. Minute Jun, she said. It wasn't a question. Just a simple acknowledgement of his presence, the same tone she might use for a delivery person. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, the power dynamic of their entire marriage inverted completely. Here, he was the supplicant. She was the one in control. Ji Seo, we need to talk, he began, his voice rough. Do we? She asked, setting down her tablet with deliberate calm. I feel like we said everything that needed to be said 7 years ago. And then again 3 years ago. And then, I suppose, 2 weeks ago at the summit. The casual precision of her words was more disarming than any screaming would have been. That night, at the summit, I didn't recognize, he started. Me, she finished for him, a small, knowing smile playing at her lips. I know. It was quite obvious. In a way, I should thank you. It was the most honest moment our relationship ever had. You literally couldn't see me anymore. I'd become that invisible. The lack of anger in her voice was somehow worse than fury would have been. I don't understand how this happened, he said, gesturing vaguely at her, at the suite, at the impossible transformation. The woman I knew, she was quiet. Simple. She would never have been capable of all this. For the first time, a flicker of something, not anger, but deep, profound sadness, crossed Ji-seo's face. The woman you knew, she said softly, was someone you never bothered to actually see. You saw a reflection of what you wanted, a quiet, convenient wife who would manage your legal problems and fade into the background when you needed to display power. You didn't see the lawyer who graduated top of her class at SNU. The woman who spoke 4 languages. The person with ambitions and dreams and a capacity for brilliance that terrified you. She walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. You didn't nurture me, Minute-jun. You suffocated me. And then you were surprised when I stopped blooming in your shadow. You didn't break me. You just erased me. And in doing so, you gave me the greatest gift, freedom to recreate myself in my own image, on my own terms. Minute-jun's desperation mounted. This wasn't going the way he'd imagined. I want to fix this, he said, the words tasting like ash. I made a mistake. A catastrophic mistake. I need you. Ji-seo turned from the window and laughed. It wasn't cruel. It was genuine, unfettered disbelief. Oh, Minute-jun, she said, shaking her head. No, you don't. You don't need me. You don't even know me. You need what I represent now. You see my success, the respect I command, and you want to own it, the same way you tried to own me for 7 years. She moved to her desk, picking up a leather folder. I'm not a possession to be reclaimed. I'm not the silent wife who will come back and fix your reputation. I'm the lawyer who's been hired by 3 of your rival organizations to audit their books and ensure they don't make the same mistakes you did. The words hit Minute-jun like physical blows. I'm also the legal consultant for the Financial Supervisory Service's new task force on organized crime money laundering. You might want to check your Busan shipping operations. I believe there are some irregularities in the container manifests from 2022 that might interest prosecutors. Minute-jun's blood ran cold. You wouldn't. I already have, Ji-seo said calmly. I submitted my preliminary findings last week. They were very interested in the pattern of shell companies routing through Singapore and then back to Seoul. Very interested. At that precise moment, the suite's door opened and Yuna walked in. She must have followed him, consumed by paranoia and the desperate need to know what he was doing. She looked terrible, her expensive clothes disheveled, her makeup smudged, her eyes wild. She saw Minute-jun and her face contorted with rage. I knew it, she hissed, her voice trembling. I knew you'd come crawling back to her. Ji-seo looked from Minute-jun's devastated expression to Yuna's fury, and she sighed, the sound of someone dealing with a tedious, predictable drama. This, Ji-seo said, gesturing between the 2 of them, has absolutely nothing to do with me. Not anymore. She walked to her suitcase, pulling out her coat with smooth, practiced movements. I have dinner with the Deputy Prosecutor General at 8. He wants to discuss new legislation on corporate criminal liability. She paused at the door, looking back at them, 2 people who had once held all the power in her world, now looking small and desperate in her hotel suite. For what it's worth, Ji-seo said, her gaze landing on Yuna, you built your happiness on another woman's suffering. You can't be surprised when the foundation crumbles. She turned to Minute-jun, and her expression softened just slightly, not with affection, but with something closer to pity. You had 7 years to see me. You chose not to. That's not my failure. It's yours. And then she walked out, leaving them standing among the ruins of their choices, forever trapped in the shadow of a woman they'd failed to recognize until it was far, far too late. The final reckoning came swiftly, mercilessly, and with the cold precision of legal process. 6 weeks after the summit, the Financial Supervisory Service, in coordination with the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office, announced a sweeping investigation into the Kwan family's business operations. The press conference was led by Deputy Prosecutor General Kim Sang-woo, the same man who'd had dinner with Ji-seo that night at the hotel. The charges were comprehensive: money laundering through shipping containers, tax evasion via real estate holdings, bribing public officials, and operating illegal gambling establishments. The evidence was meticulous, compiled over 18 months with assistance from an international legal consultant with expertise in Korean Singaporean corporate structures. They didn't name Ji Seo. They didn't have to. Minute Jun was arrested at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, taken from the penthouse in handcuffs as news cameras captured every moment. The image of him, disheveled, unshaven, the powerful crime boss reduced to a suspect in an orange detention center jumpsuit, dominated every news cycle for days. Una wasn't charged. She hadn't been involved in the criminal operations. But her assets were frozen pending investigation, her clubs were shut down, and her name became synonymous with mistress of a criminal. She moved back to her mother's small apartment in Suwon, the white gowns and diamond necklaces replaced with cheap clothes from street markets. The trial was a spectacle. Prosecutors laid out 7 years of financial crimes with surgical precision. Every shell company, every falsified document, every bribe was documented with the kind of detail that only someone intimately familiar with the operations could have provided. On the day of sentencing, Ji Seo sat in the public gallery, not hidden, but visible in the third row, wearing a charcoal grey suit that whispered professional authority. She wasn't there to gloat. She was there to witness the closing of a chapter. The judge's voice was grave as he read the verdict. Kwan Minute Jun, you have been found guilty of 17 counts of financial crimes. The evidence demonstrates not just criminal activity, but a systematic exploitation of trust, from business partners, from public officials, and from your own family members. He paused, looking directly at Minute Jun. This court sentences you to 15 years in prison, with an additional 5 years suspended. Your assets are to be seized and distributed to your victims. You are permanently barred from holding any corporate position in the Republic of Korea. The gavel came down with a sound like a coffin closing. As the guards prepared to escort Minute Jun away, he turned in his seat. His eyes searched the gallery until they found Ji Seo. Their gazes met across the courtroom, the man who'd once had everything, looking at the woman he'd thought was nothing. He mouthed something. It might have been "I'm sorry." It might have been "How could you?" Ji Seo's expression didn't change. She simply looked at him with the same cool, professional detachment she'd had at the summit. Then she stood, gathered her briefcase, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. That evening, Ji Seo's apartment in Seoul's Hanamdong, not far from the penthouse she'd once shared with Minute Jun, but worlds away in every way that mattered, filled with people. Not the fake friends from Minute Jun's world, but real connections she'd built. Margaret Chen flew in from Singapore, colleagues from her firm, women she'd met through mentorship programs for female lawyers escaping abusive relationships. They didn't celebrate Minute Jun's conviction. They celebrated Ji Seo's liberation. To justice, Margaret raised her glass of champagne. To survival, added another woman, a prosecutor who'd used Ji Seo's template to escape her own controlling husband. To never being invisible again, Ji Seo concluded. They shared stories, not just of pain, but of transformation. Margaret talked about her current position on Singapore's High Court. Another woman discussed the legal reform bill she was sponsoring. Another shared that she just won a landmark case on behalf of trafficking victims. As the evening wound down and the women began leaving with long embraces and promises to stay connected, Margaret was the last to go. She paused at the door. That speech you gave at the summit, Margaret said. About broken chains and new dawns. You weren't just talking about yourself. No, Ji Seo agreed. I was talking about every woman who's ever been told she's too quiet, too emotional, too demanding, too much, or not enough. Every woman who's been erased by someone who claimed to love her. After Margaret left, Ji Seo stood at her window looking out at Seoul's nightscape. Somewhere in a detention center, Minute Jun was beginning a 15-year sentence. Somewhere in Suwon, Una was living in her mother's apartment, her dreams of power and glamour reduced to late-night regret. Ji Seo felt, not satisfaction, exactly, but completion. The story that had begun with her humiliation at family gatherings, that had reached its nadir when Minute Jun had called her pathetic on their anniversary, had finally, definitively ended. She thought about the woman she'd been, serving tea in beige cardigans, invisible in her own home, so desperate for love that she'd accepted cruelty as its substitute. That woman felt like a character in a story someone else had written. In her place stood someone harder, yes, but also clearer. Someone who understood that real power didn't come from being chosen or validated by powerful men. It came from choosing yourself, from validating your own worth, from building an empire on the foundation of your own capabilities rather than someone else's approval. Her phone buzzed with an email. The subject line made her smile. UN International Criminal Court. Formal offer. They wanted her after all. Prosecutor for financial crimes. Based in The Hague. A chance to take everything she'd learned, from her marriage, from her escape, from her transformation, and use it to pursue justice on a global scale. She opened the response email and began typing. Some words sting. Others heal. But the truest words, the ones that cut deepest and matter most, are the ones we finally say to ourselves. I deserve better. I am enough. I choose me. And Giseo had finally, powerfully, irrevocably chosen herself. The phoenix had risen. The chains were broken. The new dawn had arrived. And she was just beginning. The end. If this story of calculated justice and transformation resonated with you, remember, your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. What was your most satisfying moment in Giseo's journey? The summit confrontation? The trial? Her quiet power throughout? Share your thoughts. For more stories of betrayal, transformation, and hard-won triumph, stay connected. Because every person who's ever been made to feel invisible deserves to know, you are seen, you are valuable, and your story isn't over until you say it is.